Hello and welcome all. On behalf of SchoolNet India, it is a great pleasure and honor to greet all of you to our series Ideas Exchange, the Ed Talk. You know, Ideas Exchange as a program for mutual sharing and developing a shared understanding has had a long institutional practice for us. We learn, grow by sharing ideas and practice, but we have launched upon a new version of this idea exchange, the Ed Talk, in which we will be inviting the leading scholars and experts in the field of education and get benefit of their insights and guidance. It is such a great honor to start this series with an eminent scholar who has contributed substantially to shape the educational understanding and practice, not just in India, but internationally. Today, he will be talking on transforming Indian education, policy concerns and priorities. It is such an opportune moment to talk about this. I request our MD, Mr. R.C.M. Reddy, to welcome Professor R. Govinda and say a few words to set the context. Reddy, sir.
Very good evening and welcome to you, Professor Govinda, sir. And as Vagesh has been briefing us, and your contribution to Indian education system so immense, we have already circulated your profile to our participants, to our employees. As you can see, we are already about 120 of us have joined in this, and the more will be joining shortly. And all these 120 people are our own employees who are involved in product development, technology development, execution, teacher training, vocational skills trainers. So variety of practitioners are here. So student educators, teacher educators, content designers, technology teams, and the ones who work with the governments, private schools, communication, branding, human resource development, finance, everybody is around. Because we're all married to this single mission, vision of impacting Indian education at middle and bottom of the pyramid. As I was mentioning, that this is the vision and mission we have very close to our hearts. And as SchoolNet with more than 20 years of experience, we survived several challenges and we continue to grow and impact the school systems in India on a scale which I think is one of the largest anywhere in the world, a private education service provider working with such large number of school systems. That's possible because as a team, we believe that technology can democratize access to education. Technology combined with high quality teaching learning material supported by the teacher training, adoption, monitoring, measurement of impact, and the feedback going back into improving the offering is the way to go forward to work with the school systems. We don't believe in bypassing a teacher and school like some other edtech apps do. We believe in working with the schools and complementing the capacity of the teacher to enhance the classroom engagement. And consequently, students' learning outcomes also will go up. That's the philosophy, sir. So that's the reason why we take the benefit of eminent people like you to come and address us, because we are in this business. We also need to upskill our knowledge, our ability to service our clientele. And a big thank you to you, Professor Govinda. And for the benefit of all our colleagues, brief introduction, although it was circulated to you by Vagesh. And you know, Professor Govinda, former Vice Chancellor of National University of Education and Planning, and is several Indian Council for Social Relations, National Fellow with Studies in Education and Culture, and is visiting Professor Institute of Education, University of London, and he taught in Baroda University, MS University of Baroda, International Institute of Education and Planning, UNESCO Paris, and several of them. I think very, very long, illustrative, very illustrious kind of work he has done. And right now, as I understand, he was actually busy penning down a book, and Vagesh managed to reach out to him and convince him to address us and provide his valuable 1 hour for interaction with us. And thank you so much, sir, and welcome you to this webinar. Over to you.
Thank you. Can I quickly request Arindam to tell us the flow of the talk today before Professor Govinda takes over? Arindam is the Senior Vice President of SchoolNet, and he looks after the strategy and helps the MD. Arindam.
Thank you, Vagesh ji, for this, and I welcome Professor Govinda for this. I would, the idea is that, since, as Mr. Reddy was also mentioning, that education is going through, during the COVID times, we have seen that the sector that was most impacted was education, and as we see that schools are reopening, there is greater acceptance of hybrid mode of learning, etc. So what we would really like to understand is how the future of education is going to span out in your view, and what guidance direction you would have for us. With that, I would request Professor Govinda to take it forward.
Okay, so just quickly, the flow is like this, that Professor Govinda will talk about an hour or so, and we will have half an hour for the question and answer. The request to all the audience who are attending this is to write their questions on the chat box, and so that we can take the questions at the end of it. That's it. Professor Govinda, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Reddy, Arindam, and Dr. Vagesh. Thank you very much for inviting me. It is a very happy moment for me to talk to you, and also feel honored that SchoolNet has thought of me as the person to address on this issue on school education. India is a sort of a paradox. When we look at the education and learning in India, it's always has presents itself as a paradox. We all know that India is one of the oldest civilization, not just as a civilization, as a learning hub it has been, and it has a very long tradition of high levels of learning, not just any kind of learning. I'm not only talking, when I say this long heritage, only talking about Nalanda and Takshashila. I'm talking even more recently, just before the British came, in fact. There are many European scholars who visited, have recorded how glorious Indian learning tradition had been. For instance, one of them, William Jones, who came in the late 18th century, and then found such treasures in linguistics, in science, in many other areas. That is how he set up something called Asiatic Society in Calcutta. So India had a very long learning tradition. I say paradox. With all that background, we need to reckon with the situation today that India has the largest number of illiterates. India has the largest number of out-of-school children not going to school. So this is a paradox. Why? How can a country with such long established traditions of learning is today in this condition? That is the paradox for me, actually. I'm not going to go too much into the paradox idea. Paradox are generally left as they are. We don't really go deeper into it. But sometimes I do feel that it is necessary to reflect on this, because if the heritage, if that our memory of the heritage starts interfering with the progress of today, then I think we need to really reflect on that also. Why I'm saying is that a heritage that we have, which we are all very proud of, is the past, learning past of India, which is glorious. But what do the schools do today is actually create the foundation for the future. I think it is very important that we don't allow while we carry the memories of the heritage. We don't really that should not become a burden on us. I think it's very important to look at this paradox in a meaningful fashion as an asset, not as a problem. I think that is a broad background I want to begin with, talking about the paradox. Now, coming to today's situation. Why I am saying this as a paradox, and then we are in this condition. We not that we have not made any progress. We know that when the British left India, um, 75 years ago, Indian education is in a very, very miserable condition. We had only around 16 to 18% literacy rate, adult literacy, and not even 1 out of 4 children were ever enrolled in school. And the situation was extremely bad at that time. And what we have achieved in 75 years is not something small, in the sense that now today we have almost every child enrolled in the school. We have 1.5 million schools that we have established in the country, and the literacy rate has gone up to 75%, whether you are happy with that or not. So, but these are not small achievement, considering that we started as a very poor country. When we got independence, we had no money to buy things, in fact, even food. That was the condition in which we were. And the population was growing so fast that it was always outrunning our effort in the education scene. Yet, despite all these things, we have reached here is not a small achievement. But that's where it stands. What else? Now, if you read the National Policy on Education 2020, the more recent documents, many of you may have gone through that. What is the feeling that I got? The feeling that I get is that every chapter is a chapter to repair something, to reset something, that we are not happy. So this is something that should bother us. After 75 years, instead of a well-developed, stable education system, why are we really struggling to really reset and repair what is happening? It is not about progress. There is very little celebration in the policy that has come after 75 years. There are more related to what is lacking. And the top of it, as all of us know, is what they call the learning crisis. That after 75 years, we need to talk of a crisis in learning. I think for a country with such huge heritage, old heritage, today to talk of learning crisis is something that should bother us. And what is it that we need to really do at this juncture? Many people would, of course, will say that all this problem that we are having about quality. Generally, the public perception is that the quality is poor. Quantity is all right, quality is poor. And there is always, and some people, the establishment will explain it off, saying that there is always a trade-off between quantity and quality. I don't understand. As somebody in the sector of education, I do not understand why, if you open a second school in a different village, the first village school should suffer. There is no reason at all. I don't think quality quantity trade-off has any meaning at all when it comes to education, because schools are schools. Once you establish, they have to start running properly if you have established them. I think that is some people would, of course, will put a general blanket saying that we have not invested enough, therefore things are not happening. I have a feeling that it is more than investment. It is more than simply opening schools. There is something more seriously, more fundamental issues that we need to really look at in terms of the way we have grown and what we have today. The way we have grown our education system and what we have today, I think we need to really look at them in a more fundamental fashion. This is what I want to say. I will try to, the next half an hour or so, I will try to present before you what I consider as 6 or 7 challenges before us, before school education system today. But before I move on, I need to really put a caveat that I'm going to use a broad brush to talk about Indian school education. But we all know that the Indian school education is not monolithic. You cannot compare the schools of Kerala with the schools of Bihar. You cannot compare education development in Kerala with the education development in Bihar. You cannot really consider the needs of schools in a landlocked state like Arunachal Pradesh with the needs of schools in places like Andaman Nicobar or Lakshadweep. They're so diverse. India is so diverse. So when I say about challenges of Indian school education, take it in that sense. It's a broad brush, and we need to go deeper into it. So I will talk in the next half an hour about 6 or 7 uh, real challenges that we are facing when we are completing around 75 years of our independent India. The first one, almost all our policy documents, including the more recent one, talks about education as the lever of social and economic progress. Everybody talks about it, and often we use the metaphor of a ladder. Education as the ladder which helps you to rise up in the socio-economic hierarchy. Well said. I think nobody questions that. Even the poorest of the poor today thinks that their children will do something better. They will go up if they go to school. I think well said. But where are we? What is this education that we are talking about, which would help us to help people to move up in the ladder? Is it capable? I think that is where we need to really look at the thing. When you closely look at the kind of system that we have created, what I find is that yes, it is a ladder, but a very fragile ladder. I don't call it broken ladder, but it's a fragile ladder. It's like, when I was small, at our home, we used to have to go to the loft and take out things. We used to have a ladder, but somebody has to hold it. If you don't hold it, it will fall off. So our school systems are something like this. And some 10% schools, the ladder has no steps. Nothing happens, in fact, about 10% of the schools. We have about 30-40% of the schools which has a one teacher or two teacher with only 30, 40, 50 children. And when the teacher goes to the schools open, and you find, where does it lead to? Half of the children in those schools, actually, about 40% of the children in the country drop out before completing even our compulsory primary education stage. That is the 8 years of schooling, which is a right to education today. It's a fundamental right of every child. 40% children, they drop out without completing. I'm not talking about the 10% where the ladder has no steps and it never goes. Then comes actually what happens to those who are there. The ASER reports year after year says they said the same thing in 2006, and today in 2017 when they brought out, they said the same thing, that around 50% children who complete 8 years of schooling are probably only at the level of second grade. This is what they say. It's something that should bother us. Why have we really reached that situation? In my view, actually, we have been creating schools like ladders without steps, or ladders who cannot stand erect, and you can climb on it. Now you may ask a question: why are you really putting our education system as a whole in such a bad light? Are there not shining examples of people coming out of the same system doing extraordinarily well, not only in India but even abroad? In fact, Indian product of Indian school system who go for higher education, sorry, they are appreciated so much. Why are you really bringing down? That's true. It is true. It is not that everything is so bad in that fashion. What is happening in India today in this system of education is that there is a percentage. There are people, if you use the same ladder metaphor, there are people who can buy ladders, who can afford to really get separate ladders which are stronger, and they climb up and reach. But the number is very small. Only around 10% to maybe 20% at best who are able to really go beyond and complete schooling and go beyond and do very well. Is it less? Should we not celebrate that? Yes, we should celebrate. They are doing outstanding contributions. There is no question about that. I don't want to deride schools which charge fees, and then private schools which provide education. They are also doing their service to the country. These children are also doing very well. But what we have created is what Amartya Sen calls privileged excellence. So we have excellence, but it's privileged excellence. We have a bottom of the pyramid, which is so fragile, which is crumbling, but a small top that is there, which is doing extraordinarily well. This is the kind of a system that if we draw a map, that is how it will look like. And why this is an issue that the policymakers have to seriously think is that this top of the pyramid, which is doing very well, I don't think we will be able to sustain for very long with a very, very fragile bottom, which is crumbling. I think we need to build the bottom also better. I am not saying that all schools will become the same. Schools cannot be the same, they will be different. But I think it is important that we strengthen our system. It is not just about investment alone. I consider that the schools, if they are not functioning well, I am sure that SchoolNet also must have come across this kind of situation. It is not just about money, it is not just about resources alone. There is something deeper, the divide that has come. I think we need to really look at that this kind of a situation is rectified. This is in my view, one of the very important one. We cannot afford to continue this kind of a what we call the privileged excellence to serve our country. The number is pretty large, privileged excellence. When we say in India, if you are talking in India, actually even the 10%, 20%, the number is so large that they can service the whole of the software industry of America. In fact, so large it is. So it may look that it is good enough, but if Indian economy has to grow much faster than where it is and has to really bring down the poverty of completely wipe out the poverty in India, I think Indian education is not adequate enough at all. And that is the first point that I want to make as a policy concern that should be there. What I call the rectify the fragile ladder syndrome or the broken ladder syndrome. The second one that I am coming to is, we all know that, since you work with the school, the heart and essence of school education is the curriculum. What you do, what finally children get in the classroom, in the schools, out of the school education program, which is not just about reading and writing alone, much more than that. That curriculum is, in a holistic sense, is the heart of education program. If you take away what is there, otherwise, why do we engage in a school is essentially to transact the curriculum and to deliver something to the children. Now, where are we with respect to curriculum? I grew up in 1950s, went to school when there were no textbooks. And whatever teacher, my teacher taught as history was my history. Whatever they taught, whatever books they could find in the market and taught us arithmetic, that is arithmetic that I learned. That is how it was in 1950s. From there, I think curriculum building evolved in a very significant manner in India. By mid 1960s, we had the state institutes of education and then the state councils of education research and training. And I think curriculum formulation and textbook preparation really took off in a significant manner from mid 1960s. I am giving all this long history is that where are we today? Today, personally, I feel when I look at the curriculum scene, we are in a mess. The last 25, 30 years, I don't know whether I should put the blame on NCERT or not. I don't want to do that. I held the directorship of NCERT for 1 year, so I don't want to really let down NCERT per se. But what has happened in the 1960s onwards, each state started really building their own curriculum, their own textbooks. But late 70s and 80s, we began looking at curriculum as a national phenomenon and start really building the national curriculum framework. Today, where we are, in my view, regarding curriculum is in a mess, because curriculum has become some sort of the play field for ideological battles. I would say ideological battles are not only confined to India. Ideological battles happen with respect to curriculum elsewhere in the world also, not only in India. I was recently reading an article from US. In one of the councils, they had taken off the shelf several books saying that, these are not good for the children because they talk about racial racial trouble and racial divisions and all those things, including such books like Toni Morrison, a well-known Nobel Prize winner. His books were also taken off the shelf. Why I'm saying this is that ideology coming into play with respect to curriculum is not unique to India. It happens everywhere else also. But what is bothering me is that the curriculum discourse, the center of curriculum discourse has been almost over-occupied with questions related to history in this country. Very little we talk about in terms of science, technology, humanities, arts, the crafts. Education is not just about history. Why are we talking curriculum? Why are we obsessed with curriculum in history alone in this country? It bothers me actually, because why I'm saying this is that look at what is happening. I am sure that you would watch for me, since you work with the schools, that the science teaching, mathematics teaching is in a miserable shape in most of the schools, particularly in the government schools. Private schools somehow manage, but even in private schools, I'm never happy with the way science is taught. We teach a new language, new vocabulary, but I don't think we give the experience of science learning at all. And this is showing up during the last 30 years. What has happened is showing up in what we are producing as science. Science knowledge production in India has dwindled very badly. There was a time when Indian science literature, science contribution to science used to be one of the top along with the Western world. But today, India is in the bottom, is somewhere closer to the bottom in terms of our scientific papers contributions in the world. Which is the one which is competing with US? Highest number of scientific papers production is China. China, which began 1950s. China also began its upward journey like us in 1950s. China is today somewhere else. It is not about economy. It is about the attention given to science education in schools. I believe curriculum discourse has to change course in India. We need to stop really quarreling only on Mughal history and then Hindu kingdom and all those things. That's right. I'm not saying that that's less important. I'm sure that many of my history of education friends will fight with me on that. But my point is that why are we not talking about science teaching? How many times do you find that our leadership, whether education leadership or political leadership, is talking about the problem of science education in this country? The world over, the West is talking. The China today is focusing so much on what we call STEM. I'm sure that you are familiar with the idea of STEM. But why India is lagging behind? Simply establishing a few elite institutions is not going to solve the problem of science learning in India. I think it's a very important one. We have an IIT. We have an IIT next door to my NIPA where I was working, but the schools around them don't teach science properly at all. What is the use of an IIT teaching science and technology, but the next door in their own shadow, a school is working which doesn't teach science properly? What is the use? What is the use? How do we really reconcile? I think for me, curriculum discourse has gone astray in this country. We need to bring it back, more holistically focused on child development from early childhood education to the K-12 that we are talking about, and focus on science education, science, art, craft, product, creativity. Talk in terms what many of you would call it 21st century skills. Where are we? We are not there at all if you are looking at our majority of our schools. So that is the second point I want to make, is the curriculum challenge. I think we are not able to, we are struggling still to really balance, reconcile between our heritage and our future, the past and the future. I think we need to somewhere reconcile and say this is where we want to be, and this is where we want to take our children to be in course of time. I think that is what I call the curriculum challenge. We need to really redo in that fashion. Today, what is happening is that there are a large number of students who come out of the school with no learning, are steeped in superstition, no scientific attitude. We keep talking about questioning, but there are no questioning skills the children develop because the teachers themselves are not really able to question and respond to many of those things. This is curriculum. For me, the children cannot question, teachers cannot question, is curriculum for me because it's the curriculum in practice, not curriculum prescribed, I think. So that is what I think we need to really change. This is the second challenge that we are facing. Third, which is not very visible, but I think for me, that is one of the very important challenges that we are facing is what I call leadership and governance challenge. You know, we there is a small group of schools who have established leaders. I will come to them separately. But a very large number of schools, about 70% of the schools in this country, are rudderless. There is no governance framework. If you go to a government school, there is no governance framework for a government school. Particularly if you are just a primary or a middle school, there is nobody to take care of you. There is neither support nor supervision. They are all left for themselves. There is no leadership. We keep talking about headmasters training. I was also involved in developing all those things. But what we do in headmasters training is we teach them about an imaginary school where probably 30 children will be there in a classroom. It will be equipped with all these things. There will be 6 hours of schooling that goes on every day. Teachers come regularly and teach them. This is an imaginary school about which we teach the head teachers. But those schools don't exist. More than 50% schools in this country don't have a head teacher even. And there is no question of local governance framework. School, we should remember, is not a national creation. It's not a state level creation. Schools are local creatures. They are created locally. They have to be managed locally. They have to be nurtured locally. And a local governance system is necessary. What a council will do with its own schools in an American country is what we need. But we don't have any such mechanism in this country. Now, this is one part of the story that where there are no leaders at all, and where we go and teach them about leadership, which sounds very well. One of the headmasters told me once, he was running his school in Uttar Pradesh outside in the compound. Generally, you will find that in Uttar Pradesh, many people teach outside, not inside the classroom. I asked him that, after a while, I asked him that, didn't you undergo training program under Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and all? And why are your children still learning in that routine fashion about rote learning? Why are you not teach? He didn't say anything. I went round and then came back to him again. After a while, I asked him, sir, you didn't tell me that why it is you are not using any child-centered learning, you are doing the same. Didn't you undergo training? Maybe it was not good. Your training was useless. I provoked him. He said, no, sir, it was very good. The training was very good. We had very good resource persons. I had never undergone such training. Everything that I said that it intrigues me. If it was so good, why are you not using it? Sir, there I also thought that I will do all those things. But when I came to school to jaisa tha waisa hi hai. It is just like the way it was. I couldn't do anything, sir. Now it is too late. More than 2 years, I can't do anything. This is a story that honestly a headmaster said. He had undergone headmaster's training program. Now, what do you tell about this? This is one part of the story. No, there are well-equipped schools with a principal and headmasters and all. I am familiar with many such schools, in fact, many private, well-established schools also. But what is lacking is that there are no innovations. We as people in India, we are very enterprising when it comes to money making. But when it comes to our own life, running our own institutions, we are very conservative. We are very status quoist. The problem with our system is that it is extremely status quoist, because in the government does everything looks all right, but although it is not happening, is that government schools, the belief is that if there is no complaint, things are all right. Even if nothing is happening, it is okay. So we have come to a situation in our system that things are not happening, but it's what I call in management, it's a slow moving. It's so slow moving that there is an equilibrium that is created, and we are happy with the equilibrium. Like I keep talking to NPSC and many other, the our public school conference, and tell them that you actually are heading the schools which are the most influential schools in this country. The National Progressive Schools Association conference, or the Indian Public School Conference. They are all the elite schools of this country. You are leading those schools, and you are the ones who have to take the leadership to change and reform this education system in this country also. Why you are not doing? You keep complaining about CBSE. You keep complaining about examination system. Why you are not changing? They are happy with what is happening. Things are moving. It's a slow moving equilibrium that we have created. And I think we need to really give up. We need to teach our schools to change, innovate and change and do differently than what they are doing. Whether it is a private school that I am talking about or a government school that we are talking, innovation is the root of actually progress. No school remains the same. Either it is moving up or it's going down. Don't think that you can really stay where you are. So that is a third point that I want to make, is that we have created there is a leadership vacuum. Even in the best of the schools, I consider there is a leadership vacuum because they don't want to change. They are very happy. They tell me when I keep talking about them, they say, sir, but we are doing very well. Our parents are very happy. We produce very good examination results. Why should we change? I think that's where the answer lies. That's where the problem lies, in fact, in terms of that, our aversion to change, aversion to progress. This is the third challenge that we are facing, in my view. The fourth one is a very familiar challenge. This is what the National Policy on Education calls the learning crisis. I think we are all today, everyone is talking about learning outcomes. And I'm sure that you are also always engaged in talking about learning outcomes, improving learning outcomes. I think I have to be a little more historical here. 111 years ago, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, one of our freedom fighters, he presented a bill to the Imperial Assembly to introduce compulsory primary education. It didn't happen. The Britishers did not agree for that. We know that. But when he introduced, he told me there were some people who were critical of it also. He told, I am aware, I'm conscious that I am very modest in my expectation. Because in introducing the bill, he said that, there is no country which has really made all people literate without introducing compulsory primary education. What I want is that if we start introducing compulsory primary education today in phases in this country, maybe in 20 years' time, that all all children in my country will become literate. After that, he said, I know I am being very, very modest. Is school education only for literacy? People ask me. Is it not something more than that? True, I am being modest, but it's not a small challenge. When so many millions of people, a 30 million population becomes literate, at that time it was 30 million, 30 million population becomes fully literate is not a small challenge and small achievement. I will be happy even with that. This is what he said. So the goal of primary schooling that he wanted was literacy 111 years ago. What are we talking today in the learning crisis? We want to establish a national mission on foundational literacy. What is foundational learning that we are talking? Basic literacy and numeracy is what we are talking about. Why? 111 years, and we are still struggling to achieve what Gokhale said 111 years ago. Now, we all know who engage with the school. Outsiders may not understand what we call learning crisis is actually a schooling crisis. It's not a learning crisis. Children learn if you teach them. But basically, the schools are not doing their job. So it is actually a schooling crisis. What has been our response is also a little bit strange. What have we responded to? The 2006, when the first ASER report came. No, before that also people were talking, the government was talking about learning outcomes and all those things, where something called minimum learning levels in 1990 we wrote about. But in 2006, when the first ASER report, I'm sure that you're all familiar with that, came and said that so many children are going to school but learning nothing, it created a public stirring. And government people also stood up and then woke up and said that what is happening. And there were seminars, there were question in the parliament, everywhere it happened. How did we respond to that? Interesting, two kinds of responses that we did. One is actually we started testing ourselves. That's more testing we have been doing. Now, almost all the state governments have initiated state level achievement surveys, like the National Achievement Survey that the NCRT does. State achievement surveys are also doing. I am not against that. I think it's a time honored understanding by every teacher. You test in order to know what is lacking, and you diagnose the problem and you remediate. I think SchoolNet is well versed in doing this, in fact, in terms of identifying the problem issues and then providing remedial education and seeing that the deficit is made up. But my question is that by testing more, you don't solve the problem. It's like, by using a more sophisticated thermometer, you don't really bring down the temperature. You only measure it better. You need medicine for that. Unfortunately, that medicine is where we are lacking. That what we are doing, I should correct myself and say that it is not that we have not launched any program for learning enhancement. Every state has something called learning enhancement programs under Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. Learning enhancement programs are very common in almost all the states under different names. But very innovative programs do come up. Like I have come across very innovative programs like, I don't know if there is anybody from Karnataka, something called Nalikali that was introduced in Karnataka. And similarly, in Tamil Nadu, something called activity-based learning was introduced. And these are all actually based on something called Rishi Valley Project. Rishi Valley Project, actually, they brought in an interesting, innovative approach to see that how things can be brought up, learning can be improved. And it has been, such projects have been adopted, almost all the states have adopted. But where are we after 10 years, 20 years? We are in the same place where we were 20 years ago. Our learning levels have not improved. This is what ASER report says. Why is it so? What is lacking in this? The problem is that innovation that Nalikali did or ABL did in Tamil Nadu, initially they were small. Who did the innovation? They were done by the teachers themselves. Teachers and local people, local administrators, they joined hands and created new approach and they taught children. A simple message that we have learned from the work of Pratham and many other non-governmental organizations is that if you teach children can learn reading and writing even in 6 months. Don't need actually 3 years even. This is what they have. Many of these projects have said. But what happens is that we launch programs, the innovative programs for learning enhancement. Afterwards, it becomes a political showcasing begins. That each state starts saying that we have this program, various names are given. I don't remember now. Different names are given, and we start showcasing even before they become, and we start multiplying, and it gets bureaucratized. And that essence of an innovation of a classroom teacher is lost in the process, and things don't change in that fashion. Going on scale, we believe, is actually multiplying blindly. Blind multiplication is not going on scale. Change has to happen in every school. And every school teacher should get involved in that change. Every school has to change. Then only I think learning will improve. This learning crisis, I don't think can be solved by establishing a national mission. Why don't we change the crumbling schools, what I call the broken ladder syndrome? Why don't we correct that? I think schools will start functioning. If you have dysfunctional schools, you cannot improve learning, and which is the essential part of it. And when we introduce innovations, don't start really projecting it larger than life image. Hold back. They should be quietly done by the teachers themselves, not publicized. That is where the answer lies. Not really the politicians and the bureaucrats taking it to UNESCO. No, if you go to UNESCO literature on innovations, India has the largest number of innovations, but they are all actually buried. The innovations come and go, but things don't seem to change. That is the third point that I want to say. The learning challenge, that fourth one. Now, related to the learning challenge is what I call the teacher challenge. It's a slightly different one. This is not just a school level issue. Teacher challenge for me today is a systemic problem that we have created. Historically, when we began expanding our school system, the real issue was that we did not have adequate number of teachers. In fact, the Sargent report, if many of you are aware of, which was written in 1945, said that we will take 40 years to really universalize primary education in this country. People questioned that why do you need 40 years to achieve that level? He said that, you cannot expand school system just like that, because without teachers, how can you expand? Without secondary education and then higher education also expanding, we cannot expand the primary education, and without that you cannot move further. So it's a difficult job. We need to space it. So that was the teacher challenge in 1950s. But today what we have done today, that is not an issue. We have a very large higher education system. Secondary education has grown multifold. I don't think that we are not producing enough number of graduates who can become teachers in this country. But the problem is different today. Twofold problems. One is the systemic level action. During the last 20, 30 years, the government, as part of their neoliberal policies, economic policies, started saving money on teacher appointments and employing people on contractual basis. Why this is very important, I am telling, is that if you engage a person only for 1 year, are you going to invest in that person for improving their capabilities for 1 year? You will consider that it's not a good investment. I don't want to invest. If you come to me and I want to invest you and teach you for 6 months, you go for training, at least you should work with me for 3 years, if not 6 years. This is what everybody would say. But if you go on employing only contract teachers, then how can you invest in them? There is no professional development. Teachers are recruited. Teachers recruitment is a scam. We know one of the chief ministers is behind bars because of the teacher recruitment scam. We recruit teachers with left and right without any consideration, and Bihar and UP and all, there are thousands and thousands of school teachers' jobs are lying vacant. We don't recruit it. We don't recruit at all. In their place, we recruit a Shiksha Mitra from local person and pay them. And that Shiksha Mitra sometimes sends another proxy teacher to the school. Even the Shiksha Mitra doesn't go to the school. So we have fractured the teacher cadre in this country. This is a systemic problem. I think it's a very serious issue. Now from primary level, it is moving up to secondary level. There are Shiksha Mitras in some states engaged as part-time or local contract teachers in the secondary level. We know that secondary schools, government secondary schools are in a miserable shape when it comes to science teaching and English teaching. I am sure the SchoolNet is aware of that there are many teachers who have never studied science who are teaching science, There are many who have never learned English, they are teaching English. This is the reality in many secondary schools, in fact. Now, how can a school system develop without the teacher? And why have we really destroyed the identity of a teacher today? You don't know who is a teacher today. This is what has happened during the last 20, 30 years. This was not the case earlier. And I have been observing, I have been a student for the last more than 45 years, education student, but I had never seen, but during the last 25, 30 years, that systematically teacher cadre has been destroyed. Now, the state governments may have benefited, they may have saved money from this by not employing regular teachers. There can be complaint that the regular teachers don't teach properly, therefore you are not doing. But the solution, if they are not teaching properly, doesn't lie there. It lies in governance. It only shows about poor governance if they are not teaching properly. It is not, if they don't go to school, if there is absenteeism, teacher absenteeism, it shows poorly of your supervision system. It doesn't tell about the teacher. It is that you have to have teachers who know. I have myself gone to thousands of schools. There are so many tests have been conducted with the teachers. That if you give a sixth standard test in arithmetic to a primary school teacher, you will find that 50% of the teachers will fail. The subject knowledge of these people, this why I'm saying this is that what does it reflect? If the teachers themselves don't know the subject matter, reflects something very deep. It deeply reflects on the secondary schools and higher education of this country, because these are all graduates. In UP now, primary schools also engages only graduates. They don't appoint other people. Now, if the graduates cannot really solve even the primary school arithmetic, how can they become teachers? We have destroyed the teacher cadre in this country, and unless we rebuild the teacher, we are very good in really celebrating Guru Devo Bhava, we will say, and then worship the teacher. But what is the use of worshipping? Don't worship the teacher. Actually support the teacher. Teachers, this doesn't mean that there are no good teachers. There are very dedicated teachers. I came across a teacher in a remote primary school in Madhya Pradesh while going there, doing some the studies there, and he was teaching alone. I went to the teacher, and it's just a small school, about 20 children were there, and then he was teaching. I asked the teacher, sir, there should be two teachers. Why are you only one of you is there? He didn't answer me. He didn't complain that the second teacher is not coming also. He just kept quiet and he went on doing. Children were really making noise, going to the teacher, showing what they are doing. He is going to it was a very different kind of a setting. I was so happy to see that. Then I asked, I praised him at the end. He said, sir, shall I ask you a question? I said, yes, you ask. I thought that, when you go from Delhi, people ask for some facilities and all. He didn't know. What he asked is something that struck me so badly and I felt ashamed. He said, sir, I recently came across a news item, long ago I'm talking about, news item, in which it said that there was an American spaceship which actually met with an accident. And I read that there was an Indian also on that spaceship. I said that I could put two and two together and say, okay, Kalpana Chawla is talking about, I could make out, yes, it happened and all. He was not interested in my saying all these things. He said, sir, I want to teach all these things to my children. Where can I get the material for this? I tell you, I felt ashamed. I couldn't answer his question at all. It is in a remote primary school. And that school, he doesn't even have any print material other than the torn textbooks there. That's the kind of a school. Such dedicated teachers are also there. But what we have done, we have not cared for good teachers. We have not cared for bad teachers also. It's a very indifferent situation that exists today. As a result, if we don't have teacher cadre, there is no school. Who will teach after all? If things have to improve, it is on the teachers who can make it happen. Two other smaller ones that I want to talk to you about. One is, I think, something very familiar. I'm not going to talk too much about it. is the technology challenge. Technology challenge I am talking, I don't know whether you should call it challenge or whatever it may be. You are better suited to really interpret whether it is a challenge or not. But when I talk about technology in school education, I find that I find a divided camp. One camp saying that technology is only disruptive and doesn't really, many professionals tell that it is disruptive, it doesn't really help, it has to be a human affair, it has to be like this, and then it only creates more divisions and all those things. This is one camp, and they reject outright. But there are another camp who think technology is the silver bullet for all our problems. And there are many people who are, I have attended several webinars in the COVID and post-COVID sessions, webinars. They are all praise about how technology has reached out and did this, and then so much they have been telling as if technology will solve all the problem of school education in this country. I think technology is, in my view, technology is not a silver bullet at all. We should not really confuse issues. There are different levels and kinds of technology, and we need to, some technologies can operate somewhere, some cannot operate other things. So I was someone was interviewing me talking about a recent development that have happened in what they call metaverse and 3D imaging, which is entering in the education scene, and who are trying to use that. I said that I have seen this, and then it has tremendous potential, but will it really, the person was asking me, do you think that it will radically change the nature of education system? I said no. Technology has always deceived us in terms of its potential. It has all the potential, but it has not been able to change radically the situation. That's not just here, elsewhere in the world, in America also, I should say that, in everywhere, in fact, is that the technology, when different kinds of technology came, when radio came, they said that it will revolutionize. When TV came, they said, education TV will revolutionize. It didn't happen. When computers came, computer-assisted instruction was everywhere, and everybody was talking about computer-assisted learning, and it will completely change the face of education. It has not happened. Why I'm saying is that technology are two levels it operates. One as infrastructure, and another as suprastructure. Like blackboard, I'm just talking. In an urban classroom, if you are in a secondary classroom in US, a iPad is an infrastructure. It has become, but it's not superstructure. But in most of our schools, it is built, it is mounted on something that already exists. It is not infrastructure yet. So revolutionize it can. Like for instance, before blackboard, how are we teaching? Can you imagine? Before print came into existence, how are we retaining the memory of the knowledge? So the revolutionary changes come when it gets integrated into the education process. In my view, technology of the kind digital technology, which is revolutionizing, in some ways, it is threatening the monopoly of the schools as the knowledge dispensers. Sole monopoly that we had is no more because access to knowledge is everywhere. But I think we need to really use technology. That is what I think SchoolNet is trying to do, selectively where it can work. Everywhere, it may not be possible to really mount all the devices that you want to introduce also, all the software that you introduce also. And at the moment in Indian school education, if you are looking at, for me, if you look at the total system, technology is still in the periphery. Technology has not penetrated as an infrastructure. As I said, it's a very important differentiation I want to make. When it gets integrated like a blackboard, then you don't separate. You are using it daily, in fact. That's what happens. So that's not happening. Even a computer is not in that situation. Even a laptop is not in that condition today in India. They are all mounted on a system which is human-centric, which is currently prevailing. It is not integrated with the human. The interface with the human system is still very peripheral in terms. Does it have potential? I consider that it has tremendous potential. I am not a rejectionist of technology. I think technology should penetrate more and more. It can really. But what it has revealed, the COVID has revealed us today, is that the technology has really created more of divide. It has not really helped. It has helped 15-20% or maybe 30% at best in reaching out and maintaining that. But the 70% who have been left completely, you know, but 30% benefited, we should not grudge. That is how I look at it, in fact. If 30% benefited, why do you grudge? Technology has helped. I accept that. But that has also created, that has brought in sharp, that has sharpened the divide between those haves and have nots also. That is also true in a way. So although I don't put the blame on technology for creating division, digital divide they call, but I think it is the accessibility that we are able to create or not create is this, and where to invest. Because technology also has a shelf life of technology is very small. The problem with shelf life, unlike of technology as compared to what has become an infrastructure. Infrastructure, it becomes, then the shelf life is self-regenerating and it will be there. But the current kind of technology that we have, the shelf life of the technology is short-lived. And therefore, you need to keep on renewing. That means that more and more money is required. So technology still is moving into education slowly. That's where it's some. And how India has to really deal with it, how much it is able to do, we need to wait and see. The last challenge that I want to say, then I will stop, is what I call the increasing inequality challenge. I was looking at the Human Development Report of 2016, where they had actually separated the Human Development Index into inequality index. Inequality index they have computed for education and all the components of the human development. What did I find? India comes out as one of the most unequal school system in the world. It is something like 45, the index, whereas the neighboring country like Sri Lanka is only 12. Even Bangladesh is lower, the index, than what India is. India is fast growing into becoming the most unequal school system in the world. I think you may be knowing that when in the 19th century school education was becoming universalized in the Western world, in Europe and America. Europe and America adopted a contrasting system, while Europe, like England, as example I am taking, or even France, they adopted what would call the class and mass education separately. They did not bother. There was a separate education for the elites and separate education for the mass. Whereas in US, led by, you may have heard the name of Horace Mann in Massachusetts, he said, this is not the way we need to really deal with our citizens. We need to create neighborhood schools, common schools. Because school is the place where children have to come, children of all classes. We don't want to follow the European model. We have to here create a situation in our schools that children of the neighborhood, all of them will come to that school, sit together and learn. This is what he called the common school, neighborhood school principle. Where are we? In fact, it is because of this, many educational philosophers call the local school as the microcosm of the local society. Dewey says it is the microcosm of the local society. Is our school a microcosm of the local society? Not at all. Our schools are the most fractured, segmented, or segregated schools today. So if you want to use a different terminology, they are more like ghettos. You have the ultra rich have one kind of school, not so rich, they are rich, will have another kind of school, not so rich will have a third kind of school. Then the lower middle class who are aspiring and who has little more spare money that they they will send to what they call the low budget primary schools, low fee paying schools, budget schools, what they call private schools. Then don't think that the government is not fractured. Government is also segregated. In fact, many state government today, like including a communist government like Kerala, is establishing international schools which will be affiliated to baccalaureate. Does it solve the problem of education? It doesn't. It only increases the inequality. What has happened? Why we need to really school? School is the place not just for acquiring reading and writing capability. School is also a place of civic life. You learn civic life in school. You learn to understand the other person sitting next to you. That's what the school is about. There are many people who have talked about that school. School is a place where children learn the culture of the other person sitting next to you who is different. But if you make it so homogeneous, what happens when such high gross inequality is created in the school system? We tend to believe, as products of such system, we start really thinking the people who don't share the same kind of thinking as me as others. The othering, in sociology we say they are the others. So they become aliens in your own neighborhood. This indeed is what is happening in India today. There is lack of empathy. We are unable to understand our neighbor because we have very little to share with our neighbor. Our children don't have very little to share with our neighbor. We bring up our children practically sort of cloistered away from our neighbors, in fact, because we don't think that we share much in it. How do you expect the children as they grow, they will share anything common with the other? This is, I think, is a very, very fundamental issue. School, instead of becoming, we always read, when we were taught in B.Ed and M.Ed, school is something which is a leveler, which brings together people, which is a unifier, all kinds of things. The terminologies were used. But today, Indian schools are becoming the dividers. They are not unifiers because there is so much of stratification in the school system today that they feel like when the sorry, when the RTE introduced 25% in the private schools should be from the educationally economically weaker section should come. Many parents openly on the TV debate, they said that they will spoil our cultural setting of the school will be spoiled. So you think that you have a separate culture. It's not an India. There is nothing like Indian culture. So you start creating enclaves. What we have done is that schools have become exclusive zones, enclaves. They are not common spaces. This is what Horace Mann said. Horace Mann said that schools have to be common spaces, shared by the citizens of the country. Unfortunately, India, having adopted a democratic constitution, having given right to education, interesting, right to education is not given as an educational right. It is given as a fundamental right under life and liberty. 21A. It is not, there is a separate section on educational and cultural rights. They did not include in that. They include here because they say that education should be seen as linking to the fundamental principles of fraternity, equality, and liberty. And education is at the heart of all these things. We need to bring people together, and education can only do. Having said this, why are we nurturing these enclaves, enclavization principle in schooling? Should we not really break this? How do you break it? I don't have an answer to it. I think it's going to be a long process. I will end by saying that no, it's not that I pose challenges, therefore they all appeared as difficult questions that I have posed and sort of a criticism of what is happening. Challenges are critical after all. This doesn't mean that I'm not optimistic. I do find that there is still today we are more optimistic that India will get better education than what it was 50 years ago. Partly because, not so much because of what the government has done alone, not because we have more schools, but because you see the people. People today are so much interested in education. There are many poor people who are ready to sacrifice even their own personal comfort, and many people who work in your home as a domestic labor, and they are ready to really work harder and then more houses in order that their children go to a school where they can get some learning to happen. I tell you, that is where our answer lies. Where does our optimism lie? Is in the people. People are pushing today. People want education. They want quality education. They don't want to really compromise on the quality of education that their children coming. To the extent they are capable, they are pushing for it. In my view, the future lies in this push. School education in India will improve because the push from the public. I'm not so much convinced that the push from the state will happen so suddenly. State is not going to become so radical from where they are for 75 years if they were not radical. I don't expect the state to become, but the people are pushing to demand their right and demand their right for education for their children. That's where the answer lies. This is what I want to share. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Professor. I was almost going to go down in deep depression after hearing all the problems that we are faced with. And I just want to resurrect myself by making a small comment that having worked with SchoolNet for last more than 6 years, what I have understood is that SchoolNet is one company which deals with technology and technology-enabled learning, but has clearly understood that teacher is the core of this transformation that technology promises to bring in. So it's a combination of technology, pedagogy, and curriculum that the cusp of these three will have to be creating that magic where teacher is in the center, and that has been the core of our understanding, the Genio that offering that we are going with, and asking people to create that digital pedagogy and the democratic possibilities that technology can bring in for the middle and the bottom of the pyramid. That is where we are trying it. And I consider that our effort is like the effort of a squirrel when Ramachandraji was trying to build that big bridge. Maybe it's very small, but the heart has not been lost here. I am not just trying to plead for an organization where I work for. I am committed to my academic honesty when I'm telling you this, and that is where we come from. Thank you so much for making us enlightened about all these challenges, very granularly that you have put it. I now invite everybody to say and ask questions, make comments. Please come in.
So one of the questions perhaps we can take, Vagishji, is the one which is in the chat window, which says that, sir, what are your views on privatization of primary education in India? So,
The private has always been part of your school education in India. You should remember that the British, when they left, there were not so many government schools. Primary education, particularly what they call the vernacular primary schools, most of them were aided schools. I don't know how many of you know, Delhi never had a government school. Delhi, historically in 1971 Act, if you look at, now it has been revised, it all talked only about how to monitor government, the private schools, because that is all the act was about, because it was all private schools only. So I am not something, the private and government would remain, and the private contribution will continue. We are not going to roll back. But privatization is different from private schooling. I think we should remember. People establishing schools as private entities is different from privatization of schooling. That means that the government is giving up and the private is taking over, handing over to private. I think these are two different things. I am not in favor of government giving up, because even now 70% of the children in this country, primary education more than 70% go to government schools. They depend on government schools. Handing over to private, we had a model called private aided schools, which is a public-private partnership for me. A very good model of public-private partnership with that the management is with the private, but the government provides the funding for the school. I think we need to refurbish that system, and we could really adopt more NGOs coming forward and then provide in that fashion, because I believe no school should be a private enclave. Now today, many of the high fee charging private schools are more like exclusive private zones, which is not good for the country. It is not good for the children who are studying there also, because they don't understand the reality of this country. So I would say there is need for restructuring not just the government but also private, to combine private and government. That's how I put it.
There is another question, Arindam, if you can field
Sure,
it, Professor.
Vagesh.
Sure.
So for the paucity of time, just to maximize the next 10 minutes which Professor has. So my question, I preempt the other questions which are there, which are general in nature. So, Professor, we have been working on a model primarily that addresses the challenges that you talked about. So essentially building the capacity of the school system, and school system includes the leadership, school leadership crisis you talked about, learning crisis you talked about, teacher crisis you talked about, adoption of appropriate technology, that illustration that you gave, technology as the infrastructure, and how do we make effectively, how do we make the teacher more effective? How do we build his capacity so that the classroom engagement goes up? And eventually all those metrics we talk about, lower dropout rate, higher attendance, higher pass percentage, better conceptual clarity, many of them get resulted in. So we deploy, as I said, an ecosystem of which includes a device as an infrastructure, and then the content, digital content, not for the way we devise the content is not to make the teacher as this sort of passive observer, but we make the teacher to use. For example, as you rightly said, how many teachers are trained? A B.Ed science teacher, even now, if you actually ask the teacher to draw a picture of heart while explaining, she may not be able to explain. Even if she explains, and there is also 15 minutes or 45 minutes taken to draw the picture of that. So we created a lot of those hotspot centric kind of content, which actually teacher uses to teach. So we have been seeing fantastic results of many of these. And given that, any advice that you have for the team here, we have almost 175 people who attended this webinar. Given the fact that we deeply believe in building the school systems, their capacity, we use technology and teacher capacity building as the roots. Any general advice on do's and don'ts for us while we chart out our mission of impacting 10 crore students over next 15 years?
I think you know better in terms of, because you are soiling your hands with technology in the school. I think you have better answer than me. I don't really do that, but I am happy that happy to hear that you are actually trying to make the whole process more interactive and involving the teacher themselves, and so that teachers become the linchpins, not the technology. The issue is about where the locus of control lies, whether it is in the technology and the software that you develop, whether in the artificial intelligence or human intelligence, to put it differently. I think that is where the answer lies. I'm happy that you are making it human centric, although technology is induced into the whole thing, and that is where we need to really do. But and also, I think since you work with the schools themselves, I think this is a very important one, because there are many edtech companies which are work outside the school, more in the supplement, but sometimes the supplements actually overtake the core, and that is how it's overwhelming it can become. Whereas since you work with the school, I'm happy that it is the schools. In the long run, the schools improve, I'm also very happy that you say that, when you engage with the teachers, you engage with the full cycle, because I believe a school has to get transformed into a functional school. Functional school. A school which is transformed into a functional school will be sustained. Sustainability depends upon how long you hold. For me, it should be one full cycle. That means a child begins the schooling and that child should graduate from the school. If we can hold that innovation, whatever you are trying to do for the full cycle, then you find that there is sustainability, because there will also be 2 or 3 generations of teachers who will have come and then acquired, because it is the teachers have to absorb all these things, and teacher turnout is a very important issue in many places, and therefore a long cycle intervention from technology will help more than short cycle interventions. That is how I look at it.
But thank you very much. Just continuation of this, another question. So always there are benchmarks, when you talk to, since I've been in the government, and when I talk to the government officials, and every state goes to Finland, for example, just to study and come back. So when we use technology to improve the learning outcomes, are there global best examples where we can benchmark and work towards? Are there successful pilots at a scale which have become systems, not very small innovations here and there, pilots, innovations, scaled, adopted for large-scale system transformation? Any examples in your research you came
No,
up?
there are many systems today who actually learning outcomes have been benchmarked, but benchmarking is not like the way we do. Many of them, particularly depending upon the grade in which you are really operating, particularly for instance 1 to 5, if you are P1 to P5, if you are looking at, you will find that the learning outcomes benchmarking is what we call the bands. In bands they are benchmarked, so that they recognize that a child who enters the school, one child may be able to master a particular outcome in 6 months, another child may take 8 months, and third child may master only in 1.5 years. So the bands are not equivalent to grades. The school, so it's a cascading band. It moves up, overlapping bands. I think that is where that understanding has to come. Whereas what we have been doing here is that outcomes are as if they are static, fixed, and you achieve or do not achieve, like that. I think this understanding is very important. Qualitative variations that are there in children's learning capability should be matched in the way learning outcomes are metrics are created. That is what Scotland does. That's what many of the states in Australia do. They use bands as the benchmarks, but not the way outcomes are specified here. That's what I thought. I don't know whether I answered your question. That's what.
Partly, my question specific was technology being used.
Technology.
Technology, are there successful large-scale adoption of technology for education?
I'm not very sure. There are some attempts that are being made to really use artificial intelligence for scaling of the outcomes, real life, that's in the real time scaling as it happens, not really scale and then juxtapose the scale. That's what we do, isn't it? We develop a scale, juxtapose and measure. No, actually, can we generate a scale using as it is happening, the learning is happening? I have read some articles, where they are trying to use artificial intelligence to feed, but feeding the input is very important. It's still in that process. I think maybe we may be able to find parallel scaling mechanisms through use of technology using artificial intelligence, which may hold a mirror, not necessarily exactly, which may hold in a gross sense a mirror to what is happening. Why it's helpful is that will provide you a holistic way rather than simply separated in granular fashion, as a discrete fashion, because our measurements are otherwise discrete. they don't really capture holistically. The problem with our measurement often in cognitive measurement is that they are discrete, skill mastered or not. We are not able to take a relationship between this skill and a third skill and a 10th skill. How are they related? But if we use technology, artificial intelligence to map out the skills as they are progressing in children, probably we are able to get a more holistic way of understanding the thing. But I don't think at the moment there is any such technology, at least I am not aware of.
No,
But
thank
there
you
is
so much.
possibility, I do feel.
No, thank you so much, Professor. In fact, your last point is the point where I believe greater engagement is possible and we will get benefited by your insights. As you know, we have been struggling with this idea of how do we measure the impact on learning outcomes or classroom engagement by use of technology. Technology alone, it's just ecosystem. You may have the best of technology, best of content, best of training, but the school leadership is not good enough. What do you do? School
Exactly.
doesn't have
That's what I
electricity.
said.
What do you do?
That's what I said. You know, you need to map out holistically progress and changes in multiple sectors.
Correct.
And
So
then, you know, then we don't have a capacity to combine yet. But probably if you feed all this data, there may be an algorithm that we may be able to develop, which really maps out and combines and tells us what is the ideal.
so
It's possible, probably.
in the midst of all these variables on which learning outcome is dependent, can we isolate to the extent possible, correlate the use of technology vis-a-vis the outcomes there? I know it's very, very limited. That's actually an area where we are struggling with. In fact, as I said, this is an area where we will reach out to you separately, and Vagish will, along with our people, we will take the benefit of your guidance on how to actually quantify the impact. That is one thing that we have been struggling. And because it's dependent on so many things, then suddenly the administrator says, somebody says, kuch nahi hua, isse koi fayda nahi. Somebody says, outstanding hua hai. So we are trying to come up with scientific way of measuring the impact. We will come back to you for your guidance on that, Professor. With this, since we already taken 1.5 hours of your time, and maybe Vagish, would you like to propose vote of thanks?
No, sir, that has been really, really very, very exciting presentation. I'm sure all of us have benefited from the insights that you have given. And as RCM sir is suggesting that we would like to come specifically about the technology to come to you. I am particularly excited about the role of technology, taking care of the regular and mundane kind of things that a lazy teacher does, and allowing them to do something very, very interesting in the classroom. That innovation, that new things that a teacher can do. Otherwise, teacher is happy doing whatever is given in the classroom, some administering some questions and students answering. So it is breaking that kind of a rut. Those kind of teachers will become redundant. Those kind of teachers, the technology will simply not allow them to be there in the educational system, unfortunately. But then teachers will have to upgrade themselves and do some serious deep thinking. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, RCM sir, for allowing this kind of a academic engagement to start, and once again getting back to the thought leaders of our country. Thank you, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Govinda. On my behalf, on behalf of all my colleagues who joined, almost at some point of time, we were 200 of them. Some people dropped out now. And thank you so much. We look forward to continued engagement, more in person. Next time, sir, we will take your time, and we will be very happy to interact in small groups to pick your brain as to what we can do together. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.